There's no silver bullet. Just by introducing an anti-corruption body, whatever you call it and where you place it, is not going to make everything good.
Is there a relationship between corruption and lack of democracy?
There's other countries that have shown that they can fight this kind of corruption without being necessarily what we would define as liberal democracies.
There is a union between people who are corrupt and the power.
Sometimes the politician is not even aware that he's being exposed to lobbying. He doesn't know that this person is actually representing some tobacco company or whatever it might be.
What advice would you have for leaders from those countries?
Those countries in the global north, they should be a little bit more suspicious about that money. They shouldn't be standing there with open arms, helping them to launder it and to invest it and to enjoy it. Hi, I'm Daniel Eriksson. I'm the CEO of Transparency International, and you're listening to the Innovation Civilization podcast.
This is the Innovation Civilization podcast, and my name is Wahid. The conversation today is what I think can be summed up as a conversation between a layperson, that is myself, and a world-renowned anti-corruption expert who's fought corruption in many different countries, that is Daniel. Corruption has always been an interesting topic to me. Something that really kills the potential of a country and a society to flourish is basically corruption. So I really want to get to the bottom of what it is, the different aspects and flavors of it, and most importantly, how to get rid of it. My guest today, Daniel Eriksson, is the CEO of Transparency International globally, the non-government organization with the mission of eliminating corruption around the world. Just a reminder that if you like today's show, the best way to propagate the knowledge to more amount of people for the maximum amount of benefit would be if you A, subscribe to the podcast on your platform of choice, and B, review the podcast episodes with 5 stars on the platform of your choice. That ensures that the most amount of people get this knowledge for free, and you're helping in the process. With that, enjoy today's show. All right, Daniel, welcome to the podcast. What a great pleasure to have you again.
Well, thanks for having me.
Brilliant. All right, let's get started then, Daniel. So for those who actually don't know what Transparency International is and who you are, can you briefly tell us what it is that you guys do and what it is that you do?
So we're the world's premier anti-corruption movement. We're an NGO, not-for-profit organization that is a federation, meaning that although I'm heading the secretariat in Berlin, we have over 100 organizations worldwide, each in one country, that is representing us. And what we do, what people are most aware of usually, is the Corruption Perception Index. But that's although that is a very important flagship product, it's a minor part of our overall work. The main work that we do is to fight corruption worldwide, and often through advocacy as our main tool, convincing policymakers, lawmakers around the world to take decisions that makes it harder for the corrupt to be corrupt.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this is such an important topic, right? Like when I talk to sort of world leaders as well as, like people in the private sector as well, but say in like less developed countries in the emerging markets, they're very much like, okay, one of the main things that's stopping the country from progressing is corruption, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like it's almost like if you can root out corruption altogether, it's going to be like it's going to automatically solve the rest of the issues, basically. Would you agree with that? Or
well, yes, but
it's a big part.
Yeah, it's a big part, but one has to define what corruption is when you say something like that.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's do that. Yeah,
and I could also say that you said that the corruption is what's hindering it all. One could twist that around and say that corruption, because corruption exists in the global north as well. It's not a development issue. And these days, I would argue that corruption is more heavily entrenched in the global north. So it's not only an obstacle to development, it's a parallel economy that we need to address as humanity in order to move forward. Just take another topic like climate change, where corruption arguably is one of the main blockages towards us addressing it worldwide.
Yeah. And you alluded there, but let's break it down. Let's break out terms basically. So when you say corruption, how do you define corruption? What are the sort of activities that you're talking about?
Yeah, so there's as many definitions as there's experts out there. We, as Transparency International, we have a basic one. So it's the abuse of entrusted power for personal gain, meaning that you have some form of entrusted power. You're an elected official, you're a civil servant, you're a police, a judge. You have some entrusted power, and you abuse that entrusted power for your personal gain. So that's the overarching definition, and I think we can talk about that later, Wahid. But the time is actually getting right to start to question that definition as well, which is a big topic. But I do think that we, as the world, have moved a lot way since that definition was phrased close to 30 years ago. But if we go one step below that, you have the kind of corruption that people often see, that the petty corruption, and it often comes to mind. That meaning that you're paying facilitation fees or paying fees to police officers in order to get away from a speeding fine, or you want to have a marriage certificate quicker, so you pay a little bit extra to some official to grease the wheels of the bureaucracy. That's one part. Then you have social corruption, where you have things like nepotism, cronyism, conflict of interest, the relationship corruption, which often comes along the line that, I'm sitting on some kind of power and resources that has been entrusted to me. I have a good friend or a relative. I give him a favor without there being any money exchanging hands, but I know that later on he will give me a favor back, and we arrange it in that way. And then keeping in mind that all of these forms of corruption, once again, it's entrusted power, because we have business to business corruption and other areas of society as well. And then we have what I would say is the largest piece and the most quickly developing piece these days, and that's state capture, or has several different names. Grand corruption, it's been called by as well, and that encompasses the kind of corruption that is happening on the top of society, where either organized crime or individuals are trying to capture the state as such, and getting laws implemented that enables them to be corrupt to begin with, and to get them into the political leadership of the country, so that they can be corrupt without being illegal, so to speak, and hollow out the foundations of democracies and transparency in government in order to capture it and run the country as their family business ultimately. In here, there's also things like strategic corruption, which is also a quickly growing topic, which is where states use corruption as a tool to achieve foreign policy objectives. So you go into a country and you proactively bribe your way in order to, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, destabilize the country or get certain resources from that country, which also is really a hot topic.
Yeah. There's, a lot to unpack there. I guess, my question is, I guess this is more like a technical one again, in terms of so you mentioned about how on the top of the society corruption, there is a union between people who are corrupt and the power, basically, right? Political powers, more specifically, they kind of hijack that. How's that different from, I guess, lobbying, which is done even in US politics and say UK politics as well, where an organization with a specific interest gives a lot of money to buy political power, essentially, right? And some of these lobbying agencies, like the gun lobby and AIPAC in the US, are really massively successful. It's not even it's not even hidden news, right? It's on their website that 95% of our candidates get into office and so on and so forth, right? So how do you sort of differentiate between the legal lobbying versus hijacking political power and quote unquote corruption, basically?
Yeah. So I think it can easily be confused, but true lobbyism has a role in democracy. in the decision makers in parliament and at the top levels of the state, they cannot be expert on everything. There needs to be some kind of mechanism for lobbying where special interest groups, even NGOs, because you could say that what we are doing as TI, as Transparency International, is
that's true.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
So there has to be an avenue for groups to inform decision makers to take the right decisions. The key, though, and the big difference between corruption and lobbying is that lobbying should be transparent. It should be registered and it should be out in the open. I will never hide which organization I represent or what my goals are when I engage in a discussion with an elected official. Whereas when it comes to lobbying, it's often that the sender of messages is hidden, and certainly the lobbyist, at least those who are not clean, let's call it, they wouldn't register what they're doing. They wouldn't register their meetings with the officials. They wouldn't necessarily register who their client is, which all should be done in order for lobbying to be contributing to the democracy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So it's about one is transparent, the other isn't transparent.
Yeah.
One is available to the public to scrutinize, and the other is behind closed doors, right? And the deals you're sort of making, and so on and so forth.
And importantly, just to reiterate that as well, the non-transparent form, sometimes the decision maker, the politician, is not even aware that he is being exposed to lobbying. He doesn't know that this person is actually representing some tobacco company or whatever it might be. And that makes it even more problematic. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense, really. So I guess in terms of Transparency International, then, can you talk about a bit more about your products, basically? So you mentioned about the Corruption Perception Index, right? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a bit more on how that's constructed, basically, and what is the mechanism? And what is it used for, basically, currently?
So it's been around for just about almost as long as we've been around, more than 25 years, and it's only really undergone one major rehashing in terms of the methodology during that history. It has 13 sub-indicators that are collected by other organizations, not us. So it's the World Economic Forum, the Economist Intelligence Unit. There's a long list available on our website. And then we use those sub-indicators, group them together, and all of these indicators are individual measurements as quantitative and objective as possible, because in the end, measuring corruption is really difficult, and that's why this methodology that we use for the CPI has stood the test of time. It is as good as you can get without falling into the trap of becoming subjective. Outcome is a score from 0 to 100 on how corrupt this country in question is perceived to be. That is the simple approach to it. One could criticize it, and we do ourselves in a range of ways, because it measures. Well, I spoke about the definition of corruption early on. It measures a small sliver of that. And one group or type of corruption that we didn't speak about earlier in the definitions are the enablers. The enablers being lawyers, banks, other financial advisors that are there helping others to be corrupt. Yeah. So if you take an example like my native Sweden or Denmark, that scores really well on the CPI because there's no petty corruption. I've never been asked in Sweden to pay a bribe to a cop or a teacher or a doctor in order to get public services. But there are big industries, as you know, with Danske Bank, for instance, providing services, or at least in the past, before they were uncovered, providing services to corrupt entities in laundering their money. Or in the case of Sweden, some very large companies that are very clean and correct at home, but when they do their business abroad, they end up in one corruption case after another. So the CPI, it's measuring one form of corruption, but
Yeah.
we do recognize that there's many other forms out there, and it shouldn't be taken as the end all in terms of
Yeah.
corruption measurement.
Yeah, that makes sense, really. So I was just looking at some of the top top 10 least corrupt countries, I guess. So there's Denmark, which scored 90, and then Finland, New Zealand, Norway, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, Netherlands, and then the bottommost most corrupt countries in the world include Somalia, Syria, Venezuela, South Sudan, Equatorial Guinea, Libya, Yemen. So is there like a relationship between corruption and lack of democracy and lack of institutional, I guess, power, would you say?
So when we look at the kind of corruption that the CPI measures, it's clear that being a democracy, a transparent liberal democracy, enables you to address the kind of corruption that the tool measures better.
Yeah.
But it's not a prerequisite. You mentioned Singapore in the top, and you could argue to which extent are they a liberal democracies, and there's other countries that have shown that they can fight this kind of corruption without being necessarily what we would define as liberal democracies. And that is yet another challenge of this tool that is becoming increasingly apparent. But then again, it's the best tool that we have in the world today of measuring corruption, and it's better than everything else that we tried so far. And believe me, we are trying to find other tools and other ways of measuring it.
Yeah. It's always hard to standardize, these sort of issues. But let's just, like walk the audience through like a, kind of use case. So say, like you pick the top 10 bottom countries, one of those countries like Libya, for instance, right? A score of 15. So you would score Libya on the CPI, and then what would TI do exactly in that case to improve corruption ratings?
Yeah, so now I think Libya is a difficult case because we do advocacy. Most of what we do is advocacy, and that you could say because we try to do just as much work, if not more work, in the countries on the top of the list. We call it the trouble at the top is our headline for it, and that is that we have countries like Switzerland, Netherlands, US, UK, Denmark, which are very active in facilitating corrupt actions abroad. So when money is stolen in South Sudan or Somalia or Syria or Libya, there will be a chain where that money is washed.
I see.
And then the individuals who steal that money enjoy that in Monaco or Switzerland or whatever it might be.
Global North, yeah.
The Global North. And by doing advocacy to receptive governments in the Global North, we actually make it more difficult, risky, and costly for those corrupt individuals in the Global South to be corrupt. We have an acronym that we use for this model, and it's the SHE, S-H-E. We want to make it harder for the corrupt to steal the money, to hide the money, and to enjoy the money. And that means that we work, and I can speak more about this later, across a portfolio of 7 different areas, topical areas, where we, according to that acronym, try to eradicate corruption everywhere.
Okay, that's pretty interesting, actually. And I was reading this statistic and I was like blown away, basically. But I was reading that more than 50% of Africa's wealth is actually outside of Africa. In your like Swiss banks and so on and so forth.
And more money is stolen from Africa. No, stolen, we can't define that, but it goes out of Africa under suspicious circumstances than what goes in as official development aid per year.
Yeah. That's so interesting, right? And every time I do visit the Global South countries, I do find that, for instance, getting money out is so hard there, basically. So there are restrictions that governments and central banks put of getting money out. Like here, like if you want to do like a PayPal transaction to anywhere, like from the UK to the US or like UK to Europe, you can pretty much send, bank transfer or whatever. But it's just like so hard doing that in the Global South, basically. So I can see these restrictions being put because of the fact that a lot of this money, illegally attained money, is being, swindled away, and
Yes, but if you have enough money and if you have enough influence and power, you can always find ways.
That's
and
true. That's true.
We published a report, I think it was last week, quite recently, where we showed to which countries and through which channels most of this money that goes out of Africa goes. It's quite revealing, and it's frustrating that those countries that are on that list do not do more. But it's also clear that this in the industry of enablers, as I call them, it's a very profitable and influential group, and they do their lobbying as well, and lobbying that not the good kind often.
Yeah, that makes sense. Really, that makes sense. So I just want to ask about, in general, corruption and like the history of it, and on a broad scale in the world. So would you say that the level of corruption is increasing, decreasing, or stayed the same over the last 100 years or so? Yeah.
100 years is a bit difficult. We only measured it for 25 years.
Since you guys have been around. Okay.
Yeah. And that is with this but somewhat narrow definition of corruption. For a number of years now, it's been stagnant. It hasn't been moving up or down. Let's put it like that. With that narrow definition. Although it's as we do our calculations, we do see that it's going in a negative direction, but still within not within statistical significance. So it is on a knife edge. But if I take a step back and I look at what I see, once again, we have a presence in 115 countries. We work on this topic 24/7. What we see, especially with corruption outside of what we measure, so this state capture, for instance, that we do not measure with the CPI, is quite clear. It's very obvious that it's increasing in a way that we haven't seen at least for 5, maybe even 10 years.
That's interesting. State capture specifically.
Yes. So the activities where governments are being captured either by organized crime or by families that sort of absorb the whole government and makes it their own. And also as part of that, as well as I mentioned to you, strategic corruption, where we see countries using corruption as a tool abroad. To bribe decision makers, parliamentarians, or others in other countries in order to try to either weaken that country or get certain decisions made in their favor.
That's interesting. And what do you think is the cause of increase in state capture corruption? What's your feel? The root cause?
I mean, here I can only go on gut feelings. It started. The trend certainly started before the pandemic.
I see.
And I wouldn't associate it with that. I can see, but have no evidence for it, that the conflicts, like going back to the 2014 invasion of Ukraine, that there was an increase right about there where Russia, China, North Korea, Iran started using this as a tool, and inspire others through their successes, and combining it with other tools such that are outside of our interest, but still from their point of view, I don't see them sort of putting it up like, okay, this is where we use corruption and this is where we use other methods, so that like the traditional almost intelligence agency methods of funding subversive groups, of funding anti-government groups, or cyber attacks of various kinds in order to destabilize or to achieve certain objectives in other countries. And the corruption pillar in their portfolio grew in importance because they saw that they managed to do things, and some of those cases have been revealed in the European Parliament, for instance, where parliamentarians have been bribed. So it is certainly very clear. And if if that is the bit of the iceberg that sticks up, what we see in the European Parliament, you can imagine how prevalent that kind of activities are in the global south.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And specifically the point about state capture, to me, it's quite interesting. I don't know the exact reasons, but I guess this is something to look into, right? Let's talk a little bit more about the emerging technologies and corruption as well. So obviously, I think there's many, the landscape is constantly changing, right? And then the bad guys are always figuring out ways to, do bad things, through technology, right? And the good guys are also trying to counter and develop, protective procedures, to would counter those. So from your perspective, I guess, what are the big vectors of technological sort of, innovations that are changing the landscape of corruption that you're seeing right now?
So, I mean, to begin with, when I first joined TI 6 years ago, I joined as the head of technology, and this was in my remit to look into. And just to say that, as you alluded to, technology can be used for good or for bad, and it's a cat and mouse game to determine how you fit into that. Right now, when I joined, the hot topic was blockchain, and blockchain for procurement contracts, or creating traceability in public procurement, and potentially also cryptocurrency, state-issued cryptocurrency, in order to have a traceability and open ledger for how money was spent in certain specific cases, such as public procurement. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, the focus more generally, I would say, is on AI and the use of AI in order to troll large amounts of data, transactional data, to do much more efficient the kind of things that banks do today when they have the anti-money laundering, AML, for instance. These often, you probably have had it yourself, you had to fill in a form. Where you're based, you're in the UK, or?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then you will have, at some point in time, gotten a form from your bank saying that, where do you earn your money from, which currencies do you expect to have, and so on. And if you make a large transaction abroad, you'll often get another slip asking you, like, oh, what's the origin of this money, and why are you making the transfer? That's part of the AML efforts that states and banks have put in place in order to try to counter this. But it's quite archaic and quite easy to circumvent. And with AI tools that detects patterns, that detects things that in large big data sets that we as humans would have trouble to see, then we could get at something that currently today is much more difficult. Obviously, what happens then is that the bad guys move their transaction over to crypto, where you don't have that open transactions, but then there will be other ways, because I remind you of the SH&E. They want to enjoy the money, and crypto right now is, if you want to buy a house in London, you can't pay it with crypto. And that means that one way or another, there's going to be a transaction from where you have your crypto, your wallet, to cash, and that will be traceable there as well. So AI, blockchain, and there's more use cases for AI than what I mentioned now, but those are the big ones.
Yeah, that's interesting, really. And how has the enormity of blockchain been since you joined? I mean, like you were mentioning something about like smart contracts and like procurement and so on and so forth. Is blockchain being used and widely adopted in the fight against corruption, would you say, right now? Or
I would say no. I would still say surprisingly that it's in experimental use. There's certain areas of government, like cadastral management, cadastral being like land registers to determine who owns which land, where there are some examples of blockchain successfully being implemented, but it's still I haven't seen mature examples of it.
Why do you think is that? Why do you think it's so hard? Because to me, the use case, I mean, at least what I've been hearing for the last decade, is quite simple, right? That, this is completely immutable data, so whatever transactions you do is on chain and no one can tamper with the on chain, right? And like the idea is that it's transparent, it's super available, right? And it just makes sense to have every sort of transactions there, So why do you think is the case that today in 2024, where Sam Altman is basically talking about 2025, where Sam Altman is basically talking about AGI, by this year, we still don't have a blockchain adoption, like a use case, which is worldwide, for corruption and for transparency.
Yeah. So, I mean, I worked a lot in my past career on digitalization and government digitalization, e-government and e-governance. I mean, the example with Google and or the OpenAI and AGI is quite interesting, because the vast amount of countries out there, they're still working on digitalization.
Yeah, just basically getting your data sorted,
scanning it.
Yeah.
If you are at the stage where if you do cadastral management as an example, land registers, where that is a few big houses full of A3 size books with drawings in it, and you come in there like, blockchain can fix this. It can't. And even if you're one step further, that you have scanned JPEGs of all of these images, which is what some have, and maybe a vector scan of these images, which would be where the sort of European countries are. There's still a fair amount of further digitalization and building those digital services. Countries like Estonia or Ukraine that are at the cutting edge of this, I saw, by the way, that the former CIO of Estonia had been on your show as well. And
the former PM as well. Yeah.
Okay. Now, so that would be an interesting question to put to them. Those countries could certainly do this if they haven't already done it. But the vast majority of countries in the world today, just digitalizing services and providing e-government without even starting to talk about blockchain would reduce corruption. Because when you have everything on paper and analog, somebody can sneak in and erase a bit and draw a different line, and nobody would ever notice. But once you have transparency through digitalization towards processes and data, then it becomes a little bit more difficult. And once you have the blockchain in place, it's pretty much impossible. But you need to take those baby steps. At the same time, OpenAI is approaching AGI, but the world is trailing so far behind. Even here in Germany, where I'm based, sometimes I just shake my head and like, oh my God, digitalization of government services, not really where it needs to be.
Yeah. That's an interesting one, actually. Like, yes, I am always confused about how we're still in 2025 and you have to do paper ballots. There's no like government central logging, with two-factor authentication, basic two-factor authentication that even like smaller apps would do, who are building apps in one day, who can basically do 2FA with your fingerprints, right? And we still don't have that at a sort of government level, when it comes to voting, when it comes to government ID, right? Paying your taxes and so on and so forth, right? Maybe I think Estonia has something of that sort, but it's just a bit like always interesting to me,
Yeah, but I mean, it's there's a balance to this, obviously, and when it comes to fighting corruption, transparency is the cure to most of it.
Yeah.
But we also realize that in a democracy there needs to be privacy, and here in Germany, where I'm based, they are very, very sensitive about their privacy because they have a history of knowing what happens when the government goes wrong. And in this unstable world that we live in today, we should be really aware of that we need to respect the information of the individual. At the same time, we need to strike a balance. So there's many countries that said that there shouldn't be electronic IDs, there shouldn't be biometrics, because the government gets too much power to monitor you as an individual. At the same time, we had a case, I think it was 2 years ago in Europe, where we were trying to get in place beneficial ownership transparency registers. That is essentially to ensure that there's a known owner for all corporations that are registered. Because one of the central, if not the most central way of laundering money and hiding ill-gotten gains, the H in the SHE, is to use anonymous shell companies. And these anonymous shell companies, they have no good purpose in our societies today. They can really only be used for criminal activities. And when we managed to get the EU to at least start with giving public access, opening up these registers that they do have for the public to browse digitally, then there was a complaint from what was said to be a rich individual that said, well, this is a risk for me and my identity, because people can kidnap my children or blackmail me or what else not. So this should not be available. And then the European Court of Justice, the highest court in Europe, took the decision to block public access. So only law enforcement and selected parts of society under difficult circumstances, because in the past, when this was opened up, we were able to query that massive data set and do all sorts of big data style analysis of it. Now we can only go and request access record by record, and we have to show a valid cause for each record. There's an example where that balance, and I'd question the intentions of that individual that filed this complaint. The balance struck over to the side of privacy, but having those opaque ownership structures is a risk to democracy as well, because if you're a foreign entity and you want to finance subversive activities in another country, you are going to use those opaque ownership structures as well. They should really preferably be banned, and there should be public access to what's it called in the UK? It's a company house. So that everyone can see everything about who is the owner of what. And real estate is another example of that, where the UK is not particularly good.
I think I was reading about this article the other day, basically how I think it said that one of the most important things that governments can do basically to decrease corruption is just do online tendering, except for offline tendering, using papers and so on and so forth, so that everything is just more transparent and open.
Yes,
right?
That's true. So the digitalization of public procurement, it's an easy thing to do. And we're not talking blockchain, AI or anything like that. Just that first step, and do it so that people see what's going on. Already there, journalists can go in and browse that data and raise questions like, why is the president's son's company getting all of these tenders? Is that really the way it should be? Now, when it's done on paper in dark rooms, the opportunity is so much higher to steal in the first place. The S in the SHE, that public procurement is the biggest form of or biggest opportunity, most frequent occurring theft, if you put it like that, of public funds. So that is one that should be in the primary focus. And by the way, Ukraine and Estonia as well, but Ukraine has been really at the forefront of this following the invasion, where they had a large influx of money and public spending for understandable reasons. They invested heavily in making their procurement system digitized and transparent, so that they can be audited by the people, civic audit in a much easier way.
That's very interesting. So this brings us to the question of like open data as well, and open government. A lot of people have different terminologies for this and so on and so forth. So I guess like if you were thinking about like, okay, you're like the head of a government and you're thinking about your cabinet ministries and so on and so forth and the different parts of the government, what sort of data should be open and what sort of data should be closed? I know that, I guess we talked about private data that should be obviously, closed because, people have private information about, like maybe where they live and so on and so forth. And there might be national security issues, which might be closed data, right? So those two categories, but what should be open versus what should be closed in order to optimize corruption, let's just say in that government. Yeah.
Optimize the fight against corruption.
For fight against corruption. Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
So, I mean, you raised the two exceptions. And to begin with, before that, I would say open until proven otherwise. You should start with a default that the data that the government produce should be open and accessible and usable for the public. And then there's two central, there might be more, but two central use cases where you need to block is national security and privacy. But that's like in Sweden, I know myself, I can go on and write in any name on the government databases, and I will get the birthday, I will get the home address, I will get some basic attributes on everyone. And yes, you can apply as an individual to be hidden in those registers, but it's a fairly formal process, and you have to show reason for doing so. And of course, the transparency first approach to open data in government carries risks. If we take the example of Ukraine, if they're tendering for the building of a bridge, then everyone can see that, and that means that Russia can see, okay, how is this bridge built? How do we most easily bomb it to bits afterwards? So the government has to have a second layer of thought there. It's like, okay, which parts of this can we actually open up and not? And if it's not open, how do we make sure that there is some third or fourth party that can come in and make an audit of it? Because if you put it in the dark, it's so much more likely to be corrupt. We have a separate program on defense and security worldwide because it is one of the most difficult sectors for corruption. Because of all the secrecy, corrupt practices is more likely to occur there.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's always, I like that framing, that open until otherwise proven, right? Basically, right? So it's like open first kind of policy, which I think the default is the opposite in many ways, right?
Yeah, in many countries, yeah.
Yeah, and in many countries and stuff. So before we move on from the technology side of things, really, I just wanted to quickly ask, just for my curiosity, so you mentioned about AI, and there's mention about so many interesting stuff happening. So there's like different waves of AI that happened, right? There was like a machine learning, deep learning wave. There was like a more optical image recognition wave. This one is more LLM based, which is like large language model based, right? So out of curiosity, have you seen any interesting projects or like implementations of LLMs in terms of fighting corruption, basically?
I haven't really seen a mature solution using an LLM for corruption fighting, but I could see, especially with some of those more specialized LLMs, theoretically I could think up of ways of doing it.
Yeah, what would those be?
Yeah, if you have a semi-digitized government where they have a bunch of PDFs, or not even PDFs, like document images, and you want to browse that for patterns of certain companies, because once again, individuals use multiple anonymous shell companies in order to do their business.
And entities,
And if if you can teach an LLM model what you are looking for and how you're looking for it in that difficult to access data, of course, it would be easier if the data was actually structured and accessed in a proper way, but most of the time it isn't. Then it should be quite easy to troll non-numerative data, like, company registration documents, other big textual documents, contracts, public contracts, and find the relevant parts. Something that would have taken thousands of hours for a person to do could be done in hours only.
Yeah.
That kind of investigation tool.
Forensic. Like a forensic AI LLM. Yeah, I mean, this is true actually. Like, I'm no expert in this. My kind of understanding of this just comes from like movies and stuff where you see like a forensic analyst going through like tons of different transactions and data sets in order to say, oh yeah, it's this shell company, where this is all like, started and so on and so forth. So you're right. If for instance, there was an LLM model where you train it, like you said, what to look for, right? And how to look for it, it can go through, it can scrape through both public data as well as private data sets of a certain bank that you have, you've basically, got access to, and for purposes of litigation and so on and so forth. And then combine that, right, to do like forensic, analysis and then so on, saving like thousands of hours, maybe. Yeah.
And because the bad guys are really good at hiding themselves.
Correct.
As you've seen in all of these big data leaks. That the Pandora Papers and so forth. They use multiple layers of shell companies, and it takes hours and hours and hours because that data is not structured at all to troll through it.
Yeah. And just to add to that, it's gonna get much more challenging, to actually trace any of this, because very soon you'll have these agentic sort of agents, right, doing transactions with each other, without even any human sort of say interaction and stuff. They're sending these are like AI agents with crypto wallets, or accounts and stuff, and then they're transacting and sending money to each other and then doing different things that they're incentivized to do. But
this is something that needs to the democratic countries needs to look at this, because like, if you have a system where you essentially clean the money or you erase the origins of the money by bouncing money around, diluting it and mixing it through crypto or regular bank transactions, so in the end you don't know which money of this is dirty and which one of it is clean. But keep in mind that all of that is done for the person who does it in the end to enjoy the money. So somewhere, sometime, the money goes from the digital system into something. Real estate, expensive university tuitions, sports cars, mistresses, all of these things that they tend to collect. And there you can detect it and you can see it and you can link it with a person. The problem then here is that you have no legal enforcement if they've done that tumble drying laundry thing in the middle. Well, you cannot get to them with the current laws in place, and that is something that has to be explored at greater depth.
Yeah, that makes sense, really. I mean, just starting by flagging off huge transactions, right? Which are quite mysterious and digging deep. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, to look into, right? So that's quite interesting, really. So moving swiftly forward, so let's talk about, I guess, some of the more potent examples, of anti-corruption and corruption, so on and so forth. So, are there any countries in the world or personalities in the world that you really look up to when it comes to fighting of corruption, basically, and how much they have achieved, basically?
Well, Ukraine stands out on that list.
Okay.
Tell
us more.
And they had already done quite a lot going back to Euromaidan and sort of the liberation of the country, and even more so following the 2014 invasion, because they realized that Russia was using corruption as a tool of eroding their democracy, and not only eroding the democracy, a tool of warfare to try to capture the country, which they have done successfully in other cases. But they took this very seriously, and it's sad that it has to go to the extent that the public at large only see corruption as a threat to their livelihood and their ways of life, when it's so much in your face. Because once the public, the citizens of Ukraine, saw what was at risk, they stopped accepting that, because that's what happened. Ukraine, according to our CPI, was on one of the bottom countries in Europe when the war started. And a war does not make a country less corrupt. Still, Ukraine has managed to climb in that list year on year. And that is because they made it a priority. And that's not only the government, the citizens made it a priority to make sure that corruption has no room in society. And making it taboo, paying a bribe or being part of a corrupt system is to help the other side. And that, with combined with their very good efforts in digitalization and using new technology, have made them an excellent example. Very few countries in the world have managed, and particularly not during a war, have managed to make such much progress in so short time as they have.
That's quite interesting. And just double clicking on that, so are you saying that this was more like a bottoms up anti-corruption approach versus like a top down from the government, like the citizens?
I think it was both, and it has to be both, because if it's a bottoms up, you have like a Georgia style situation that we have right now, where in Georgia, the country, of course, our colleagues are struggling to get the government to understand what is going on, and the way that there you have state capture, which I've been talking about.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. And when the government then is not working with the citizens, you have a situation where you're not getting much progress. The citizens are pushing the government to be more transparent, but they sit on all the power. They sit in the law enforcement and the judiciary. They can capture the whole space, and you don't get anywhere. You have to have will on the political leadership level and with the people, and when they all point in the same direction, then it moves forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting, really. To me, like the Ukraine example is quite interesting, actually. I don't think it's well known that they've actually climbed up the rankings of anti-corruption, basically, even during a war. To me, what's interesting is, particularly for countries undergoing transition, and I think currently Bangladesh is an interesting country who is undergoing a transition. So just for context for the audience, I think there was a dictator, Sheikh Hasina, who was in charge and lots of state capture for the last 12 years, right, including lots of elections won, and then like now they had like a transition of government where there's a caretaker government, led by Nobel Prize winning laureate Muhammad Yunus, who is basically trying to clean up, the stack of when it comes to corruption and so on and so forth. And there's some very interesting like documentaries and stuff being shown right now. I think this is one Al Jazeera documentary of the former land minister under the previous government in Bangladesh, who basically has, and Bangladesh is a poor country, but despite of that, this person has like more than 350 properties, in around the UK and a lot around Dubai and so on and so forth, right? And it's really fascinating, right? So what sort of advice, I guess, would you have for transition countries and leaders of transition countries like Muhammad Yunus, who's come in with a public mandate, I guess, right, to clean up, to reform, and Bangladesh ranks like quite at the bottom tier, right, when it comes to corruption and so forth. So what sort of advice would you have for leaders from those countries?
There's literally no silver bullets in this, and it takes money to move forward. And once again, you because the example you gave now, it's an example of state capture and grand corruption. You have individuals, ministers, who then takes that money and enjoys it by buying expensive properties in the UK and in the US and what else not. And to begin with, once again, those countries in the global north, they should be a little bit more suspicious about that money. They shouldn't be standing there with open arms, helping them to launder it and to invest it and to enjoy it. We need to take our responsibilities, because there's too much of the narrative today that, oh, poor Bangladesh, they made themselves this mess. No.
I see.
We have a responsibility, because that's just one minister. I can tell you that there's going to be a lot more of that, such examples of money being sucked out with our help on the cost of the citizens in Bangladesh. Then what should one do? Well, I spoke earlier on, and it has proven to be, if you want to fight, the pure corruption, it's transparency. To try to find transparency in the most critical areas. It is public procurement tends to be a hotspot, a hotspot that is usually also relatively easy to digitize, and try to work from that outwards. Because, one challenge, and particularly in countries that start to eradicate and be successful in rooting out corruption, one challenge is that people are more corrupt if they see more other people being corrupt. This is scientifically proven that if you live in a society where you see and exposed to a lot of corruption, you will be like, well,
just normalized, basically, right?
Not only that, you feel like, well, why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't I get some out of this? And then you're more likely to be corrupt yourself. The problem is that at the start of rooting out corruption, like Ukraine now, when they got really effective in detecting and getting through their judicial system cases of corruption, people saw corruption and they hadn't seen it before, because by its very nature, it stays in the dark. And then that is actually there's a risk in there of people being encouraged to be corrupt themselves. So you have to be a little bit smart about it and focus on building the country. Going after corrupt individuals and making law enforcement your primary tool, the only real benefit there is to get the money back to the country. If you see that individuals, Moldova is one example where the previous government stole essentially the whole government coffer and buggered off. There you have to go after those individuals in order to ensure that you get those funds back. But going after individuals just to put them in jail, that doesn't help the situation, really. Of course, I'm all for ending impunity, but you have to be strategic about it as well. Often, it's not the individuals that create the corruption, it's the system that creates the corruption. So if you have a very corrupt country, and this is a risk in Bangladesh as well, and you remove the corrupt leaders of that country, you bring in people who have all the good intentions and all the goodwill and intellect in order to drive this in the right way, they are still going to be challenged on a daily basis of this corrupt system that is festering and really hard to turn around. It is possible. Once again, we've seen Ukraine, we've seen other countries where this can be done. But the focus must be on changing the system. You need to change some individuals as well, but you're not going to have progress by only changing individuals.
That's really interesting, really. And when you say change the system, do you mean the laws, or do you mean the processes of the cabinet ministries, or both, or like, what do you mean, like systems in general?
So we call this a kleptocracy. If you have a government which is set up, managed through corrupt proceeds, so you have a place like Russia or North Korea, where the government's kept together by everyone getting paid corrupt money. Yeah, and the system is working through corruption. Corruption is the method of governance and control. You need to find ways, and there's no silver bullets on this one either. You have to look at your country. What is that? Is that new elections? Is it some kind of public awareness raising campaign? Is it going into technical bits of public procurement or transparency in budgeting and costs in order to address things like shadow employment or what it might be? What are the big problems in your country? Of course, if the country is one that lives of extractive industries, oil and minerals, that's a spot where you would want to start, because that's usually, there's not only oil and money that comes out of that, that's also corruption. And so you have to look at it. And then more generically, if I take that step, I could say like, well, apart from all that I just said, go and look for what are your biggest sources of revenue as a country, and make sure that you get that money and that there's not too many divergences, and work from there. Because if you've had an authoritarian leadership for over a decade, there's going to be corruption in most parts of society.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're basically saying to prioritize the high impact, high revenue areas, right?
Yes.
And then go on and change the systems from those areas, right? And then eventually you reach, priority P4, P5, and before you know it, you've changed the system like 70%, 80%, right? Of what needs to be done.
But don't be naive, huh? Because when you're changing a system like that, there's going to be very powerful forces that have built their whole meaning and revenue stream on that corrupt infrastructure. And once you start to try to change that, they are going to push the other direction, and that's going to be through not so nice means. Yeah. So it's wrong to think that there's inherent goodwill that automatically will create transparency and integrity. It's corruption needs to be pushed out of society and held out of society. The minute you relax, it comes back, and that goes for us in the global north as well. And we see that today very well.
Is there a leader, in your opinion, throughout history who's done an exceptional job in pushing these opposing forces who are trying to, undo the job of anti-corruption?
Oh, I mean, I don't like pointing at individuals,
Sure.
because of the reasons that I mentioned. There are plenty of examples of individuals that have done an amazing job in putting forth the agenda of anti-corruption. Like the founder of TI, Peter Eigen, he dedicated his life to that, and he's absolutely great. He's not a politician, but there's plenty of people who have done a great deal. But I heads of state, I don't like to put their names out there, because it's today and things can happen tomorrow, and no,
I get it. It's just like, it's quite interesting, right? Because if you might be a head of state, or you might just be a cabinet minister, or even an MP, or in a democracy. I'm talking about democracies, I'm not talking about autocracies, right? But it'd be good, and maybe this is an idea for you guys to do more case studies on this, on how to manage the opposing forces, right? When you're trying to change a system, right? Like systemic changes for corruption that you're trying to do, right? There must be, in a democratic system, techniques, laws, regulations, comms, public communications, social media strategies. It's all guns blazing, right? They need to turn the head of the dinosaur eventually,
Yeah, but all of those tools that you just mentioned are the same tools that they use to turn it the other way, yeah?
The other way as well, yeah.
Yeah, so you have to be very aware of that, and for people to come to trust you in this post-fact society that we all live in, you have to be very mindful on how you go about it. Transparency is, I mean, they say that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and this is true here as well.
Yeah.
The more, and not only shining the light on the past government, to shine the light on your government as well, and accept that is going to get skeletons out of the closet.
Yeah.
But the more light and transparency that you have on your government, the bigger trust you will have from the citizens, and that trust, that is the key currency. The more trust you have, the more you can do, and the more progress you will have in your priorities, in which areas that you can fight. But the less transparency you have, the less trust.
Yeah, in general, right? I have two more specific issues I want to touch, and then we can call it a day. So on this issue, like one of the, I guess, like state apparatus that most states use to fight corruption, like the TI sort of implementation body within a government apparatus, is these anti-corruption commissions, or anti-corruption, bodies that the government has, right? So these are usually, under like a cabinet position and so on and so forth, right? Or might be outside a cabinet position. From your experience, how effective or ineffective are these anti-corruption commissions? Because I've seen a lot of these governments, sometimes they put together this anti-corruption commission, and it does like tons of good stuff. But then if the next government sort of comes in and the whole system is kind of rigged, then it's sort of sidelined. They go after opposition figures only and not ruling party. So like from your experience, what is the effectiveness of these anti-corruption commissions and so on and so forth?
There's no silver bullet, just by introducing an anti-corruption body, whatever you call it and where you place it, it's not going to make everything good, and there's all sorts of risks with it, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It's quite easy. Just like you can run elections without being democratic, you can have all of these bodies in place without having any intention to be transparent and to fight corruption.
Very good point.
So you need to have these tools, and if they're set up in good spirit with the right intentions, they will be effective. It's harder than what I said there, but then they will have a chance to be effective. But if the government as such is rotten, and you set up an anti-corruption commission or body at the side of it, that's not going to do. And in the end, they would have to throw out the whole system.
Yeah.
There's an example in Albania. They did a reform of their judiciary, where they focused on ensuring that all the judges in all courts on all the levels of the country, they needed to declare their assets. Yeah. And if you had undeclared wealth, so like a weird wealth that you couldn't explain where it came from, then there would be a specific investigation, but you were also given the opportunity as a judge to just resign, and there wouldn't be an investigation because, they're trying to leave the past and move to something new. And I believe something like 40+% of the judges just decided to quit. Yeah. And that just highlights how deep corruption can run in a country. And you can imagine if the policy would have been to be like, we're going to prosecute everyone of those judges that has unexplained wealth, they were going to do that forever with not enough judges in the country to actually do it. Mm-hmm. And the same goes for what you're talking about as well. And when I say you have to be smart, you have to be strategic as a head of state. if you want to move from an autocratic, kleptocratic state to something more transparent, it is a really, really rocky road, and you have to have massive amounts of integrity in order to get it done.
Yeah. That's interesting, really. And I mean, I was thinking about this the other day, and I'm going to brainstorm this, with you live right now. And anyone who wants to build this product, is free to take the idea and build it. But I was thinking about some kind of like a public dashboard to increase transparency. So this is like a public dashboard for the government with its citizens, right? And what I was thinking is basically, it's just like a dashboard which says, what is the current state of the government? So each of the ministries can input their KPIs that they're aspiring to and their current KPIs, so target as well as reality. And then they can put like, okay, why they did not hit their target this quarter, and it's only normal that they might not hit their target this quarter, right? And it should include like, I guess, the CPI, the corruption perception index, the GDP indicators, right? The Gini coefficients, everything should be sort of live in like one dashboard for one nation state, right? So all the ministries like the judiciary and stuff, it should also be fully transparent and available. So through 2 clicks, you can find, okay, what are the revenues? What are the costs for this ministry? What are the revenues? What are the costs for this ministry? And so on and so forth, right? So it's like an entire like one-stop shop public dashboard that just maxes out the transparency for a government, right? And you can go through the tenders and so on and so forth as well as the political pledges they've made, and then the KPI trackers. Right?
There you're getting into innovation where the KPI tracking on pledges. Exactly. I do believe up until the political pledges piece, what you said. I haven't looked at the Estonian government web pages, but I would expect them to have something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, we run companies like that. I used to work in corporates.
Exactly. Yeah, same here.
That's how a company is being
run. Yeah.
And why can't you do it in the government? I fully agree that having that level of transparency and then clickability. So you as a citizen, okay, you didn't achieve your goals here. You click on it and you click down and you can see the big picture on why you didn't achieve it. And use some AI to explain the data and the interrelations. That would be amazing. It would be a good product idea.
I was just literally thinking about like, why doesn't, because a lot of times for particular ministries and so on and so forth, you have this public mandate to do XYZ, but it takes 1 year, 2 year, you get nowhere basically, right? And I guess it's incentivized for politicians and ministers not to have that kind of dashboard because it puts out your whole work.
Of course not. Of course not. I mean, I used to work in the UN as well, or in sustainable development, and people were not so comfortable with accountability.
Yeah, exactly.
Because when it says there, you can always provide a narrative verbally, and it sounds good. But when you have data, then it's hard to hide behind good talking.
100%.
But what you said about the CPI, though, I must just put in a footnote there that the CPI, because some countries are using the CPI as such a KPI.
I see.
Now, you should realize that it's not really developed to be used as such. And some of the data points in the CPI, they trail up to 3 years.
I see. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you take it, if you do actions and take decisions this year, the plus or minus, by the way, if you do things that increase corruption, that might only be visible 2 or 3 years into the future. So using that as a management tool, there's too much lag, and one has to realize that many of those macro figures, including the GDP, because you don't change GDP on a quarter-to-quarter basis. Actions taken today in mature societies will have 100%. Effects years into the future. So you have to be a little bit careful with associating actions taken now with changes in KPIs that are measuring something years back.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And this is quite interesting. On those rankings and different indexes and so on and so forth. So when I was talking to the Prime Minister of Estonia, the former Prime Minister, so he was telling me to the point about the public, how the citizens feel, like the bottoms up approach, where Estonians are quite obsessed with the rankings, like world rankings of this, world rankings of that, and so on and so forth, as a general social thing, as like a societal thing, right? So that's why like they're very obsessed about, hitting those and crushing those rankings, going above, and beyond those. So that's a very like interesting way to put it. And I don't know, again, this was me just workshopping my, I guess, like frustrations about, how transparent these different governments are and so on and so forth. But having worked both in public institutions and private institutions and building tech there, I do see that there's lots to be done, when it comes to transparency and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah. And digitalization as well.
And digitalization.
I do think that what we're seeing in the world right now is the end of an era for democracy. And that doesn't mean that democracy will finish, but there is a need for a democracy 2.0 or whatever number we are on at.
Yeah.
That really leverages technology to a completely different extent to the benefit of the citizen. And that means one of those aspects is that it increases transparency into the government, so that it will be much easier for citizens to do their civic audit and get their understanding of what is happening and why are things working or not working in my government. Yeah,
100%. I think in general, everybody would benefit from a just society, right? And a society where justice prevails, right? Be financial justice or, and so on and so forth. So definitely like increasing transparency is a way for that. There's quickly one point I want to touch and come back to is like, you mentioned about a lot of these like countries in the global south who are having issues with, corruption, but, their money is basically in the global north, right? And I mean, I obviously see that, I live in London, and I can see a lot of these so quote unquote countries which have problems with state capture, right? And the elites from those countries are basically buying up all the properties here in London, without naming any names, right? And it's actually also quite an interesting thing. And it's interesting you mentioned about the global north countries should take that factor into account, like stop that in the first place, right? But I also think like, like the incentives are not there for them to stop it, The reason is because like eventually what these corrupt individuals from other countries, which have issues with state capture are doing is putting more liquidity into the economy of the global north, right? So they're taking money and some of these might even be taxable, so if you buy assets here in London and stuff, you're paying the UK government, right? So for a long time, like for in the UK, for instance, before this Ukraine war started, Russian elite and Russian oligarchs would, buy up a lot of properties and invest a lot. And there's like a pure infrastructure, financial infrastructure here set up for them to wash their money, right? And the UK government was completely okay with that until, the start of the Ukraine war, right? So I think like for a lot of these like quote unquote countries in the global north, the incentive is not really there for the governments as well to stop that kind of thing,
No, there isn't. And this is what I was talking about early on as well.
Yeah.
It needs to stop. They need to realize that not only are they aiding and abetting theft in other countries, you're also eroding your own democracy. Because with this money, with this dirty money, comes a lot of other things. And the same route that dirty money takes, that route will also be used by foreign states that want to finance subversive activities in your country or buy up strategic resources or whatever it is. It just needs to be, if you are a true democracy, it needs to be hammered out. Our office in the UK, Transparency International UK, they are quite engaged in this topic because particularly real estate in London and UK is a frequent target for for investment of these kinds of dirty money. And there's even a touristic tour in London, the Kleptocrat tour, it's called. You can go for, and they go around to major buildings in downtown that are owned through anonymous shell companies and structures by foreign officials that might not have clean money to buy those things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that makes sense, really. I think it's been a great discussion, Daniel. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really great conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant.